Thank you all for coming out tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for being patient while we got the last of our stuff set up. I just want to start by thanking you guys for coming out and supporting the event. And we just want you to know that we all appreciate your interest in answering one of life's most important questions. Is it reasonable to believe that a person can have a relationship with Jesus Christ? We also want to thank the Souter Family Funeral Home for allowing us to use their facilities for free. If you guys want to make a donation to them afterward, there is a jar in the snack room that was just out this way. And they have a jar that says donations on it. So you can leave a small donation if you'd like to the Souter Family Funeral Home. So I'm going to get out of the way pretty quick so that we can get to the debate tonight. All that I'm going to do is introduce our two debaters, and then I'm going to give you guys the format, explain how the debate will go tonight, and then after that we'll begin. So let me start with Josh Sommer here on our left. Josh Sommer will be our debater affirming the topic tonight. Josh is the co-founder of the Reformed Collective blog network and co-host of the Collective Cast, the official podcast of the Reformed Collective. He's the husband to Christina Sommer, who is currently pursuing her doctorate in chiropractic care. And on my right is Ty Wilson. He will be our debater negating the topic tonight. Ty is an amateur atheist activist who was a former Christian of 17 years. He's passionate about LGBT rights, the separation of church and state, and the discovery and promotion of truth through reliable methods of reasoning. He is married to his beautiful and intelligent wife, Kaylee, and is the father of two terribly wonderful children. What I'm going to do now is explain to you guys the layout. Before Josh and Ty debate tonight, they set up an agreement that they both agreed to rules to make my job really easy, so I don't have to actually moderate a whole lot of arguing. So there's a set of rules that they're going to follow. I'm going to explain those to you guys so you understand how the evening will go, and then what your role in the evening will be, which hopefully will be minimal. That also makes my job easy. So here's the resolution that Ty and Josh agreed on for the topic. A personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Is it reasonable to believe a person can have one? So the way this is going to go is there's going to be an affirming opening statement and a negating opening statement. It will begin with the affirming and the negating. That will be 20 minutes each. After that, the affirming rebuttal will happen, and then there will be a negating rebuttal. Those will both be 10 minutes each. Since it's really hard to pay attention that long, we'll give you guys a 5-minute stretch break. After those the affirming and negating rebuttal, you'll get a 5-minute break, and I'll announce that when it comes. So you can get up, use the restroom. If you want to grab snacks, you can. After that will probably be the most fun part of the debate. There will be just a conversational cross-examination. So Ty and Josh will both have mics, and it'll just be open, free discussion between the two of them. That'll be a fun part of the debate to watch. But then they'll both also get, after that, an affirming rebuttal and a negating rebuttal. And those will be 5 minutes apiece, so they can both kind of reflect on the cross-examined conversation they had and give 5 minutes of feedback on that. And then we'll close with 5 minutes of closing statements where they'll both try to summarize the entire debate as much as they can, starting with affirming and ending with the closing. Then we will give you a 10-minute break. This is the part where you're going to get to have play your biggest role in tonight's event. It'll be a 10-minute break, great time to use the restroom, get snacks, but also there are index cards on the seats that you sat on. There are also pens back on the little cabinet back there, and there are pens right up here front in the middle as well. What we'd like you to do, if you come up with a question during tonight's debate, write it on one of those index cards. There's another way you can do it as well. You can text it to me. I'll have it'll be coming right to my laptop, so if you don't want to do all the work if you have horrible handwriting or something like that, you can text it to me as well. And in case you're interested in that, I'm going to give you the number for it. You're going to have to text the question to 913-229-4529. So then during that 10-minute break, I'd like for you to bring your questions up here from the index cards and put them on the table for me. I'll also be collecting them from the text messages as well. And then after those 10 minutes, Ty and Josh are going to sit together. I'm going to come up here with a microphone, and I'm going to have a couple of questions that you guys submitted to ask them. So what you need to do in your question is address it to whom you want the question to be asked, and then I will ask that question to that person, and the other debater will get a chance to give their thoughts on the question as well. That will be a 20-minute session, and then after that, that will be the official end to our debate. But both of the debaters told me beforehand that they would love to stay up here afterward. If any of you have more questions, or if we didn't get time to get to the question you submitted and you really want to hear their answer on it, they're both willing, and I think they're actually willing to pay for your supper if you'd like. That's what I heard at least. So let me say one more thing just for your interaction. Please do keep as much of your applause at bay during the debate. We want to respect these men, the time that they've put into this. And in your questions, since we only have 20 minutes, I am going to have to sift through and pick questions and try to get it so that each one of them gets a question back and forth. So I just want you to know, if you want your question to be asked, the things I'm looking for, first of all, are respect. So please be respectful in your question, how you word it, and what you're asking for. And second of all, because these guys have put so much time into the topic, the specific topic we're discussing tonight, I'm going to privilege questions that relate very closely to what they talked about. So I know you might have tons of questions that might not specifically line up. Those would be great questions for after the Q&A time, but I'm going to give privilege to the questions that really relate to what these guys talked about tonight. So we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A there, and then that'll be the official end, and you'll be free to go. So I really appreciate your guys' time tonight, and without further ado, please welcome up Josh Sommer. And there we go.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Good? Good. First, I want to start off by thanking everybody for coming out this evening. I know it's a Saturday evening. This is a 2-hour debate, and so it's really encouraging to see everybody come out for something like this because it's an important question. I want to thank our moderator, Joe, for taking his time out of his Saturday to moderate this debate. Make sure we toe the line, I guess. A couple of rowdy guys up here. And then I want to thank Ty as well for agreeing to this debate. And then my beautiful wife, Christina, who has helped me so much, logistically speaking, putting everything together and all that. So, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, is it reasonable to believe a person can have one? That's the question that's going to be debated this evening. Joe, I don't know if the clock's moving or not. Okay. So we need to really turn our ears on tonight and pay attention, because this is a really important question. This has to do with eternity. It has to do with metaphysical reality, the reality in which you live. This has to do with your daily experience and everything. So the type of relationship I will be dealing with this evening is a relationship which I submit that all people have with God. All people have a relationship to God, albeit in two different ways. Even unbelievers, like my opponent, have a relationship with God. According to the Christian position, unbelievers have a relationship with God in Adam, while believers have a relationship with God in Christ. It's also worth mentioning, by way of clarification, that this debate is not about the existence of God, nor is it about the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth or his resurrection from the dead. The debate this evening deals with the reasonability, the rationality, or the warrant of a particular belief. The resolution this evening deals primarily with whether or not a person can reasonably believe this relationship can or does exist. Thus, tonight I will provide 3 arguments. 1 is the transcendental argument for covenantal relationship. 2 is an account of epistemic warrant for belief in this relationship. And 3 is a negative polemical internal critique of atheism. So what's the nature of the case? Why are we here? What's going on? What's the dynamic of this discussion? I want to talk about that a little bit before I really delve into my actual argumentation. Western evangelicalism, that is the common church, really, that everybody knows here in North America, tends to use the term personal relationship with respects to a saved believer. But I will be defending a broader relationship than that of what we might call union with Christ. The question under investigation this evening explicitly narrows the definition of this relationship to our Lord Jesus. But it is true that by virtue of Jesus being of one essence with the Father and the Holy Spirit, and thus being God himself, unbelievers also have this personal, albeit condemnatory, relationship with Jesus. I'm referring then to what we might call a covenantal relationship. The type of covenantal relationship we must deal with tonight is that relationship the unbeliever has with God and therefore Christ himself. They are covenantally related to the triune God of the Scriptures in Adam. That's a key point. The failed and insufficient covenantal representative or head of unbelievers. Now, because of his worldview, my opponent will strongly disagree with this claim. You see two sets of binoculars up there detailing two different kinds of lenses through which we can interpret reality. He will go to great lengths to show that it's unreasonable to believe a person can have a relationship with God, more specifically with Jesus Christ. He may bring up how he doesn't think there are any good reasons to believe the relationship is true. He may claim that the evidence simply doesn't allow for the possibility of such a relationship, let alone the actuality of it. But we all need to be asking the question, what is so bad about believing something without evidence, for the atheist anyway? And what does the atheist think evidence is? Can their worldview account for the interpretation and the definition of evidence? Thus, the de jure question, that is, whether or not one is justified or reasonable in believing such things as relationship with Jesus, is often construed in terms of what we would call propositional evidence. But why is this the case? That's a question I'm hoping Ty will be able to answer for us this evening. Moreover, my opponent, again according to his worldview, I don't want to be presumptuous here, but this is just my experience with atheism, assumes a certain method for the interpretation of evidence. Modern atheism usually entails methodological naturalism as it relates to scientific inquiry. This provides the atheist with a much narrower evidence base than the Christian. And now we must note at this point that that human reason for the atheist is seen to be ultimate. For the Christian, all evidence is seen as fundamentally created by God. For the atheist, all evidence exists by virtue of random chance or coincidence, not by virtue of a transcendent mind. This is another difference between us this evening. The Christian is the subordinate interpreter of God's thoughts, but the atheist plays the part of God in the interpretational endeavor. Because of this, him and I will differ insofar as how we interpret evidence, as far as how we define evidence. For example, I may see the precise regularity of the universe as evidence for a creator, a grand orchestrator, so to speak, of the cosmos. Or I may incorporate scripture or supernatural occurrences into my evidence base, contra methodological naturalism. My opponent, however, cannot allow for this, according to his worldview, according to philosophical pre-commitments. Therefore, the discussion this evening needs to address philosophical pre-commitments or presuppositional foundations. Now, my first argument is called the transcendental argument for God's existence, but I've modified it to fit the question at hand this evening. Now, the transcendental argument for belief in a relationship with Jesus Christ is this. A relationship to God is reasonable to believe because it's impossible that the contrary should be true. Without a covenantal relationship with God, we could not reason, we could not logically conclude anything, we could not know truth to be true, and we could not assume the scientific method as a viable tool for discerning evidence. Without the self-sufficient God who has revealed himself and related himself to us covenantally, we cannot know anything to be true. And this is because our thoughts about the world around us are predicated upon God's revelation. It's not random, it's not by chance, it's by design and by virtue of a covenantal relationship. Because of this, we are able to know God. We are able to know what he has revealed to us in creation and through his word. Next, what I want to do is I want to lay out a case for warranted covenant relational belief. And this is a version of Alvin Plantinga's warrant in Christian belief, but it's modified again to fit the question at hand. As I mentioned at the outset of this debate revolves around the reasonability of the Christian notion of personal relationship with Jesus. The question, therefore, as noted earlier, does not deal with the propositional evidence of something like the resurrection of Christ or the existence of God. Rather, the question tonight deals with whether or not it is at least reasonable to accept the belief that a person can have or has a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I would argue that it's actually properly basic and perhaps even self-evident to have belief in Jesus Christ. Here I want to establish positive warrant for my transcendental convictions, that a covenantal relationship exists by virtue of the impossibility of the contrary. Now, by way of preface, warrant is that quality which distinguishes true belief from knowledge. A belief cannot have warrant if a person does not have cognitive faculties that work properly in an environment suitable for them. 2, have these cognitive faculties working properly according to a design plan. And 3, operate according to a design plan that has a high probability of producing truth. And when I say design plan, think of something like the human heart. It works according to a specific way, a way that it is supposed to work. Warrant also may be strong or weak depending on the level of my commitment to said belief. An example of what it means to have warrant may help at this point. I may believe there to be a pain in my right shoulder. In order for me to have warrant for this belief, my cognitive faculties must be operating properly, or else it could just be an illusion. It must be operating properly in an appropriate environment. Those cognitive faculties must operate in accordance with a design plan, and this design plan must be a good design plan, having a high probability of yielding true beliefs. So what does this mean for our debate this evening? Well, to clarify, this criteria is assumed in everyone's daily life. It's not a logical argument which we reason through upon every event we come to in our experience. Atheistic scientists, for instance, assume these criteria in every experiment they perform. Now, according to the Christian worldview, we meet this criteria. The Christian is consistent in assuming this criteria for warrant. We have a basis for doing so. But what about the naturalists, the materialists, the secular humanists? As we have already seen, no proponent of either of those can be consistent in claiming to meet this criteria. An atheist does, for sure, meet this criteria. They do, and they do it wonderfully well. There are brilliant atheistic scientists out there that can do brilliant work. But they shouldn't be able to, according to their own claims about reality. They shouldn't be able to identify or evaluate proper function, should they? Some, like Ruth Millikan, for example, have suggested that proper function is best interpreted in terms of survival function. A natural mechanism, say a heart, is said to function properly if it has had a prior ancestor organ which functioned properly. And this is playing off of naturalistic evolution. This ancestor organ had to proliferate over against other more insufficient ancestors of the modern heart, for example. But this doesn't really account for proper function at all. Why? Something can have proper function regardless of whether or not it had an ancestor. The first coal factory, for instance, had proper function, even though it was the first coal factory. Likewise, the first biological organisms, whether they be humans immediately created by God, or smaller units of life, like bacteria or something of that nature, could still be said to have proper function without ancestors. My last argument comes in the form of a negative. It's an internal critique of atheism. It must be noted, once more in different terms, my contention is that my opponent really has no basis for taking a position on anything. He has no warrant for truth claims. According to atheism, it is implied we are nothing but matter in motion. According to atheistic secular humanism, for example, you are all mechanical animals filled with biological matter. That's it. That's about the substance of our existence. According to his position, you have absolutely no value besides what value you think you might have and what value others think they should confer upon you. Thus, any claim to value is nothing but a human opinion if atheism is true. After all, what we need to ask at this point is whose opinion is better than the other's opinion? Whose opinion should be taken as priority? I mean, this is an important question because didn't the U.S. fight 2 world wars over this? They went through a civil rights movement, and they condemned Russia's communism, all because of ethical questions. Most people in all 3 of those instances believed something was very, very wrong. But again, according to atheism, where does this notion of ethics come from? When it comes to an argument like the one we will hopefully have here this evening, there is no reason to believe in any truth, whether or not it can be found. There's no reason to think that we can know the truth, and there's no reason to propositionally exclaim truth claims, according to atheism. Therefore, according to atheism, there is really no reason beyond a human desire or mere preference that we should have this debate, because truth cannot be known. Why can't truth be known? Well, because we're nothing but mechanical bags of biological juice. I mean, we're really nothing different than this Alka-Seltzer tablet right here. One of us is popping, the other is popping, we're fizzing, and we're saying that one pop is true and the other pop is not true. What I think is true is just the result of the laws of physics acting in a certain way upon the biological substance within my brain. So too, my opponent merely comes to a different conclusion based on the way the laws of physics acts upon his brain. On this view, we are naturally determined to think the way we think and come to the conclusions that we come to. Any value you think you might have and any truth you think you might know is nothing but an illusion set off by natural laws acting upon matter in your heads. We couldn't therefore say that anything Hitler did or anything that Mao of China did or anything that Joseph Stalin did was wrong then, can we? They were just thinking and concluding their thoughts according to certain laws acting upon the biological stuff in their brains. My opponent's worldview functions upon the implicit preclusion of the supernatural, and this is important to note as well. But as you can see, he borrows from the Christian worldview. Atheists have morals, desires for truth. They have assumed belief in other minds. But ironically, anything which occurs in nature could never be the product of God's providence, or a testimony to the Creator's glory, or dare I say, a miracle. It must all be explained through the lens of methodological naturalism, but we're asking why that's the case. It's followed according to beliefs formed logically before empirical experiences with the outside world. But the statement, for example, that methodological naturalism ought to be the standard of epistemic justification is itself unable to be justified by virtue of the scientific method. Indeed, incorrigible beliefs, self-evident beliefs, and a priori beliefs are all beliefs which a person can have warrant for apart from the natural sciences. Atheistic naturalism cannot account for the supernatural because of its basic presuppositions, which it arrives at, by the way, epistemically before the process of scientific induction. In other words, my opponent has a philosophy of fact guiding his interpretation of things around him, which is not guided by the empirical sciences. You see, the atheist wants to criticize the Christian for not basing their beliefs on what science can give us, but then they turn right around and assume something like the uniformity of nature without a valid empirical reason for doing so. If you ask an atheist, how do you know the future will be like the past? It will appeal to the perceived reliability of nature in the past in order to justify their assumption of the future. But this is begging the question, since the answer assumes the very thing it's supposed to be solving. Likewise, if someone were to ask, why is the car green, you would expect me to say, well, because I went to the paint booth and had it painted green, because that's just what I wanted to do. It would be logically out of line for me to answer with something like, well, because the car is green, right? That's called the informal fallacy of question begging. We should all be on the lookout for those types of responses this evening. I propose that the atheist can do nothing but beg the question with respects to philosophical and scientific inquiry, and especially with respects to his criticisms of the reasonability of belief in a personal relationship with Jesus. Now my conclusion goes as follows. I'm just going to summarize the points I've already went through. First, I've construed an argument for a relationship to Jesus Christ by way of a modified transcendental argument, and have shown that a divine covenantal relationship is at least reasonable, granted my argument for the impossibility of the contrary. Second, I have furthermore demonstrated how a person can have warrant, and therefore a reasonable conviction, in believing that a person can have a personal relationship with this Jesus. A Christian can consistently meet the criteria for warrant, while atheism would have a hard time consistently accounting for the necessary requisites like proper function, a properly working cognitive faculty. Thirdly and lastly, I did an internal critique of atheism. You see, my opponent wants to argue for things like truth, for what he feels to be right and against what he feels to be wrong. He's concerned with the truth of reality, but according to his worldview, he should not be able to discern any sort of truth at all. According to atheism, my opponent can't account for his own argumentation against the reasonability of the Christian notion of relationship, and therefore, he cannot account for the debate we're having this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you one thing, and that is all wisdom and knowledge, all the treasures thereof, are hidden in the person and work of Jesus Christ, through whom the world was created at the command of the Father. This is a Trinitarian operation from the get-go. And you can have a relationship with this God through the blood of Christ. He stood in our place. He justified us, covered us, so that he could take upon himself the wrath of the Father, which is just. It's perfect justice, because we're sinners from the very beginning. And Jesus stood in our place and took upon the punishment we deserve so that we can have reconciliation to God. That's the Jesus I'm defending this evening. That's the type of relationship I'm defending this evening. And it's by virtue of his work that we can be declared righteous, not by virtue of our own. by virtue of Christ's work and Christ's work alone. I would encourage each one of you to think about that this evening. What I want you all to think about as this debate goes on is about who's providing the best foundation for rational discourse, for reason, for things like empirical science, for the inductive principle, for things like rational discussion, for things like going to school, for things like waking up in the morning and brushing your teeth. All of these things assume that there is a certain way the world works. There's a proper environment in which the world works. There is proper function. There's a design plan that everyone assumes. There's morals. There's truth. And everybody seems to want to drift towards these things. Everybody wants to argue about the truth because the truth is important. Ty believes in the truth. Ty cares about the truth. All I'm doing is I'm calling into question his consistency in caring about the truth according to his worldview. We all care about the truth, and that's because we're made in the image of God, just as it says in Genesis 2. And that's all. I'll see the rest of my time. Thank you.
Please welcome up now Ty Wilson. Ty will have 20 minutes for his negating statement.
You can have that mouse too. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me all right? Awesome. All right, let's get in presentation mode here. All right, so I'm so thankful everybody came out tonight. I see some people that I know, a lot of people that I don't know. I have to really take my hat off to Josh here. He did a lot of work, a lot more work to set this up than I did tonight. And also thanks to the funeral home for giving us the space. It's really awesome. So today we're going to talk about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Is it reasonable to believe that somebody can have one? Now, when Josh and I talked beforehand, and we talked about what topics we might talk about, and when I saw this one in writing, it kind of really worried me. Because there was a part of me that can still put on my Christian hat and think, wow, this is kind of offensive. It's very in your face. And I want you to know that I'm sensitive to that. I want you to also know that what we're talking about tonight is not necessarily whether you have a personal justification for your belief in Jesus Christ, but as a whole, from the outside, is it reasonable to believe that somebody can have one? Now, who am I? I'm a nobody. I've been an atheist activist for about 3 years now. I was a former Christian of about 17 years. I'm a husband to my beautiful wife and a father to 2 of our children. You can see them there. Now, the biggest question that I wanted to address tonight before is between the 2 of us, who is taller? That's me. He just got a couple inches on me. That's it. Next question I wanted to address preemptively is what is an atheist? What does that mean? You hear that term quite a bit, and it's thrown around, it's misused, and just misunderstood. So this maybe will clear this up a little bit. Imagine that bubble was theism, that is a belief in a god or gods, and everything outside of that is atheism. No belief in God or gods. It's pretty simple. It's not a worldview. It doesn't really mean anything other than you don't have a belief in a god or gods. There can be atheists that believe in the supernatural. There can be atheists that believe in all kinds of wacky stuff. I've met them. Now, one of the biggest questions that I got when I announced that I was going to do this is why. And I got that question from believers and non-believers alike. And so I wanted to address that really quick before we go on to anything else. The answer, it's fun. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking with Josh. He's got very strong convictions. I enjoy talking with people and learning their views and how our views differ. It's really fun, and that's one of the biggest reasons I do this. The other is that I genuinely care about people. I want to steer people to the truth, and I don't think that religion is true. So that's another reason I put myself out here and I talk about it. The other is I could be wrong, and I don't like to be wrong. I'd rather be right. Now, this isn't really the best form to figure out if you're wrong or not, but it's a start. The biggest reason, though, is motivated actions. What do I mean by that? Imagine this block here is you as a person. And here is a deeply held belief. Could be anything, but in this instance, let's just say that it's a belief in Christianity. Christianity is true. On top of this, you will have some ancillary beliefs. They grow out of that. And then on top of that, we've got motivated actions. That's the biggest reason I do this. What is a motivated action? I want you to understand, again, and call back to earlier, I'm sensitive to the fact that there's a person here, that we're not talking about just something in the abstract. But I also want you to know that I'm not attacking you. I understand that you're a person. I was a Christian for 17 years myself. I'm concerned about the belief. I'm not trying to attack you. So what are motivated actions? What are some examples of that? This is one that hits very close to home for me. I had a belief in Christianity, and part of that belief, one of the ancillary beliefs from that, was to not vaccinate. I didn't vaccinate my kids when they were first born. That could have been bad. Everybody remember where they were on 9/11? This is another action that springs out of some motivated beliefs. People die. Other actions are disowning children. I'm a very big proponent for LGBT rights. One of the reasons I talk about that at all is because there are lots of people who find out their children's sexual orientation and disown them, or find out their children are atheists and disown them. Now let's look closely at this claim. Personal relationship with Jesus Christ, is it reasonable to believe that somebody can have one? I want you to focus on what we're actually talking about. We're talking about the possibility here. Even if we decided it was possible to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, we've still got all of our work ahead of us to show that somebody actually does have one. Now, what do we want to accomplish? And this is the one slide I could go home after this. Do we want to maintain belief, or do we want to discover the truth? I think for me, this is one of the biggest reasons why I took deep looks at what I actually believed. I realized that at one point in my life I was maintaining belief, and I wasn't concerned about discovering the truth. Now, my opponent talked a lot about reasoning, and with good reason. This is really at the very heart of this topic. How can we reason correctly? My opponent is convinced that we can only reason with a God. Now, that's an interesting claim, but I don't know why. I don't know why anybody would say that. Why is it necessary? Why is that God necessary, the God of Christianity? When we talk about reasoning correctly, we can really speed it up quickly. And this is a brief overview of epistemology. But we can talk about better methods of reasoning, or we can talk about worse methods of reasoning. A good example of this would be something very mundane. See, I have a door in my house, and I need to put a new one in there. My door's broke, got to get a new door. Are there better ways of figuring out the size of my door so I can go buy a new one? And are there worse ways of doing that? A worse way might be to ask my dog. My dog doesn't care and has no idea what the dimensions of my door are. A better way, I could, for example, take a piece of string and mark on the door jamb and say, hey, it's this dimension by this dimension. An even better way than that would to be actually take a measuring tape and figure it out that way. This is the sort of trial and error that we've used to build up an epistemology. Now we can talk about all different types of terms and what that exactly means, but at the end of the day, we're talking about what's a better way and what's a worse way to accurately represent the truth of the world. Get my water. Now, what are some better ways? What are some better ways to reason? Well, we can say that a better way to reason is a way that's reliable. It produces consistent results. Okay. We can also say that a better way to reason is a way that's internally consistent inside of itself. And the biggest way that we talk about what a better way to reason is whether or not it's effective. If our epistemic goal is to discover truth, then the effectivity of our ways to reason would be to lead us to truth. Now, what are some worse ways to reason? Well, we can just believe. And that could be anything. We could just believe what we've been taught. We could believe what we read. That could be any claim, and that's a terrible way to reason. It could lead us into all sorts of untruths. Now, we could also make exceptions. We could say, no, this is different. This thing that I believe in is different. It's not approached. You can't approach it the same way. That's called special pleading, and it's a very bad way to reason. We could also get emotional, and we could believe things because we want to. We could believe that we have souls because we don't want to die. We could believe that we'll see our loved ones after we die because we really love them and care about them. We could also rely on anecdote. We could rely on stories that we've been told, and I remember doing this quite a bit as a Christian. Here's the biggest way that I see that we can really reason poorly, and that is to demand certainty. We can also demand closure. Now, those are kind of the same thing, but what we're doing at that point is saying we can't know anything unless we're absolutely certain. We can't have any unanswered questions. Another way is to smuggle in beliefs in our definitions. If Josh and I were talking about what the best pizza was, and I said that Chicago pizza was the best pizza, and he was like discussing the merits of other different types of pizzas. New York pizza is good in this way, and I said, nope, Chicago pizza is the best pizza. We could talk for about 20 minutes before he understood that I was defining Chicago pizza as the best pizza. And there was no discussion because that was how I was defining it. It's tautological. Now, what is a personal relationship, since that's what we're talking about? Well, let's look at a simple relationship claim. This person here is my sister. That's a pretty mundane claim. Yeah, she's here in the audience. Yeah, we know that humans exist. We know that people have sisters. Sisters can look like that. And we know that siblings can know each other. This is kind of how we do a quick heuristic on our mind, figuring out, is this claim reasonable or not? Now, my claim about my sister fits what we know about the world. And I can also show evidence of this. She's here. I have photos of her. I can ask her things, and I can get answers. Now, how about another claim? This is Angela Merkel. Believe that I have a personal relationship with her? Angela Merkel does exist. She could have friends. I have been to Germany, and people can know chancellors. So this kind of fits what we know about the world. It's a little bit bigger of a claim. Now, I could show you evidence. I could show you photos of me and Angela Merkel. It could be Photoshop, but you know. I could say that, hey, I have her phone number, and you could look, and it's a Germany area code. I could call her up, Skype her, and say, hey, Angela, talk to these people. I could also get information from her, get answers. What's the best type of Germany, Angela? Oh, here's one more. Yeah, you know who that is. Yeah, that graphic took me a while. So this is Elvis. You believe I have a personal relationship with Elvis? He did. Elvis Presley is dead. From what we know about reality, people don't have relationships with dead people. Not by what we define relationships. I wasn't even alive when he was alive. And death is sort of one way in our experience. Now, I can already feel the cringe. Am I comparing Jesus to Elvis? No. But what I'm telling you is that we're making a special exception in the case of religion. Now, if you already believe in the supernatural, all this is easy. There's no reason to not believe. Now, if you believe in an all-powerful deity, it's all the more easier. Josh talks a lot about beliefs, but I think there's some hidden beliefs in this claim of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You might believe in a soul, in God, in prayer, and a historical Jesus. There's a collection of memes and belief that are behind this and support this. Now, if you already buy into them, then this is easy. Now, why do I claim that it's unreasonable? The biggest reason I claim that it is because of confused Christianities. Josh here, great guy, but he is not mainstream at all when it comes to Christianity. There are thousands and thousands of different denominations of Christianity. And they've branched and changed, just like you would imagine a man-made institution would. if there was a relationship with Jesus Christ, one would think that it would be congruent, and people would be able to talk to Jesus and figure out what is the correct Christianity, instead of all this confusion all over the place. Now, how could I be wrong? It's important to figure that out. A demonstration of communication of information would immediately show me to be wrong. If there was a way to demonstrate that Jesus Christ had an actual relationship, and in normal relationships we can communicate information, if there was a demonstration of that communication, immediately I could be proven wrong. I don't know that anybody can do that. Now you might say, that's not how it works. You don't just say, hey, Jesus, tell me this thing that Ty doesn't know, and then I'll tell him, and then he'll believe. That's not how that relationship works. I submit to you that that's making an exception. That's special pleading. This is kind of a way to restate that. It's different. In our culture, we sort of handle religion with kid gloves. And more than that, we treat it as a different magisteria, a different thing altogether. We don't take a critical look at it because it's a personal belief, and a lot of people have it kind of ingrained into their identity. I think that's harmful. I don't think that helps us find the truth. That's it. Appreciate you guys listening to me. There's my email. If you ever have any questions you can't answer, ask me right now. I'm going to go ahead and see the rest of my time. Josh? You want this back? Yes.
Okay, Josh now has 10 minutes for an affirming rebuttal.
All right, thanks, Ty. Thanks for everyone who stayed through my boring presentation to get to the good stuff. All right, so Ty went through a few different things, a few different important things, and made a few different claims, and I think drew upon a few different assumptions. I think he actually snuck in a few beliefs of his own throughout his opening statement. So one of the first things that I want to touch on, because I think it was kind of the central focus, was the central focus of why Ty thinks it's unreasonable to believe in a relationship like this. And I think it's because of the confused Christianities, the denominational issue within Christendom or within the Christian church. Within the Christian church universal, there are several different denominations, different views concerning church ecclesiology and baptism and things of that nature. But the Bible never makes a claim concerning church polity, church government, the way the churches are supposed to be organized. The Bible never says the church has to be uniform. The Bible makes the claim that the church is united in Christ, but not uniform. So there's a margin for different types of beliefs. And that's, I think, what the church at large believes. Whenever he showed the signs up there, there's most of those up there, except for maybe one, would be considered Orthodox Christians. Everything that we differ on would be secondary or tertiary issues, like baptism. The fact, though, that unifies us is that we have the central doctrines of the gospel in common. Also, we have the central principles in common. For instance, the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. We all believe those should be handled. We all believe those should be administered properly within the body of Christ. That's not the issue. The issue is as to how those ought to be administered. And so that's why biblical studies is important. That's why pastors are important. That's why biblical scholarship, those who train most of their lives to answer these types of questions and look into these types of questions. And I would submit that you can find out a lot just by reading the Bible on your own. You may come to a different conclusion on a secondary or tertiary issue, but the Bible never says that that's not going to happen. It never cancels that out. It actually never even says that it's wrong. We are exhorted to be of one mind, but we're not exhorted to be uniform in all of the ways in which we practice our religion. So I don't think that's a problem. I never saw the denominational issue as a problem. as far as when the atheist states it to the Christian and says that this is an issue. I've never seen that as a problem. I don't even know if most of the church would even see that as a problem. I think what is the problem is certain assumptions of, for instance, that it is a problem. An assumption that the denominations, the various denominations within the Christian church, that it's a problem. And I think it's assumed that it's a problem because Christian doctrine is not explored enough by those from outside. It would be a problem, however, if Scripture said, you must all be uniform and look the exact same and practice the exact same way, and here's how you practice it. But it never says that. It calls us to unity in Christ, not necessarily uniformity. Uniformity is not going to come until glory. And even then, there's going to be room for creativity, art, differences in persons, and things of that nature. Ty said that he would gladly accept the truth of Christianity if there were certain demonstrations made. However, why is it the atheist privilege to be able to say that this is what I demand? I'm going to tell you a little bit about an experience that I had with an atheist at Balboa Park in San Diego. I wanted to kind of prove the point that no amount of evidence would get this guy to admit to Jesus, the existence of Jesus, the lordship of Jesus Christ, the salvific work of Christ. That's what I wanted to try to do. I wanted to try to show that evidence, propositional evidence, which is what I mentioned in my opening statement, would not get this guy to admit that there's a Jesus. I said, what if Jesus came down out of the heavens right now and landed in front of you and said, I am the Lord, and looked you right in the eye and you had a conversation with him right then and there? He said, oh, well, it could be aliens. It could be aliens that's trying to act like Jesus and control humanity with religion and so forth. So there's really no, I don't know if Ty's the same way, probably not. But what I'm saying is that if you artificially or arbitrarily constrain evidence to your preference or your own demands, you're playing the position of God at that point. You're putting your mind in an ultimate situation to be able to say, this is what I demand as evidence. But God has talked to us. God's claim is that He's talked to us through His Word, the Word of God. His claim is that He's created all things and that all people know Him by virtue of being made in the image of God. This is what God has claimed. But that's not good enough. It's not good enough to have the Scriptures. It's not good enough to have the prophets, the law. It's not good enough to have the apostles. It's not good enough. It's not good enough to look through church history and see that people in the first century were going to their graves because they wouldn't deny one simple thing, and that's because they thought they saw Jesus resurrected in a body, in a physical form. There were people that were willing to die on that basis in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth centuries. All until Christianity, of course, became legal in the Roman Empire. Why? Whenever Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea, there were Christians walking into the place where they had the Council of Nicaea, still maimed from the persecution they went through with Diocletian before. These people thought it was important enough to give their lives for. They thought it was important enough to be drug around the Circus Olet in Rome at the back of a chariot until they died. They thought it was important enough to be consumed by lions in the Colosseum. Why? Why all of a sudden is this massive demographic of people all of a sudden so concerned about this principle of this resurrection, which, by the way, is not found in Greek, Platonic, or Homeric literature? Why all of a sudden do they think that they need to give their lives for this? But that's not good enough evidence. There has to be different evidence, a different kind of evidence. Basically what I'm hearing here is that historical research, almost our whole science of historical inquiry, is canceled out. I mean, how are we supposed to learn anything through history if 5,300 or 5,400 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament is not enough? Early church history and people going to their graves is not enough. That's not enough. People shedding blood for something they truly believe that they saw. All they had to do was deny the resurrection. Keep in mind also that we have the issue of reason. I think what Ty is assuming is that his reason is reliable. He made a remark earlier that there are it's wrong to suggest that some other beliefs are different from, say, beliefs you would form upon propositions, logical propositions. But there are beliefs that are different from that. I think any modern philosopher would tell you that incorrigible beliefs cannot be verified through propositional empirical evidence, or even rational evidence. That is a logical syllogism, modal logic, modus ponens, things of that nature. They cannot be verified by those methods. A priori beliefs, which are beliefs that all people have, they cannot be verified through those types of methods. Self-evident beliefs, which all people have, cannot be verified with those methods. Ty's belief that my mind exists and that you all have minds cannot be verified with empirical evidence or rational inquiry. It's assumed. These things are assumed. But why? According to atheism, if everything is naturalistic, if we essentially live in a materialistic world, what accounts for belief content and not simple neurophysiological changes in our minds led on by the laws of physics? What accounts for that? Because if we're just truly just falling in one direction or another and coming to different conclusions based on the laws of physics working on our minds, how can truth be known? We're just material in motion, and that's it. How do we know that any of the beliefs we form, first of all, are reliable? How do we know that the propositional or cognitive faculties that we possess are reliable? Do we have an account for those? According to Christianity, yes, because God has created these things for us to know Him. And what it takes is, because this is demonstrated through a process of elimination. If I was up here talking to a Muslim, it would be a different opening statement. But I'm up here talking to a self-professed secular humanist who is also an atheist. And so it's important to note that that worldview is deficient for observing or examining anything when it comes to reason, to rationality, when it comes to empirical evidence, for even being able to know things like truth and things of that nature. So to kind of cover what I just said, God has said that He has spoken with us through His Word and through general revelation. He's made us in His image in Genesis 2. But why should we reject that upon atheist suppositions? That's what I need to know. I need to know, why are we constrained to methodological naturalism, which entails propositional evidence only, when I've already demonstrated and argued for different types of beliefs that we all hold, notwithstanding the propositional evidence. We assume other minds. We have beliefs, for instance, incorrigible beliefs, like I have pain in my right shoulder, things of that nature. We hold these beliefs, but we don't stop there and say, oh, I need to explore whether or not these beliefs are true. That's just contrary to human experience. We don't stop at every belief we form and everything that we assume in order to explore it via a scientific inquiry, via an empirical method. We just don't do that. Thus, people can have warrant for believing in things that cannot be proved with empirical research. And that's it. Thank you.
I forgot to start Josh's clock at the beginning, so Ty will have 10.5 minutes for a negating statement.
Those 30 seconds.
Let me get my book. You better make it count, Ty.
Right? Boy, I don't know where to start. So, Josh is right. This is a very important question. If he's correct, this is a question that could impact eternity. If he's correct. Josh made a lot of claims about truth and reason, and said that, I don't have a way to know truth or believe truth. Are you going to start the call? Oh, it's in your head. Okay, sorry. He's making me scared here. There's no epistemic warrant on atheism. And I think it's important to note that atheism isn't a worldview. Atheism doesn't say there's no supernatural. Atheism is a lack of belief in a God. It's interesting, we talked a little bit about different denominations, and Josh says that the Bible does command unity, but not uniformity. But that's not really what I'm saying. If we talk about different methodology in churches, that's one thing. What I'm talking about is different teachings altogether. When I was in When I was in Sunday school, I remember very young, I was probably 5, one of my Sunday school teachers got pulled out by an elder. And I remember asking the pastor later, what the heck was that about? I mean, we were in Sunday school class, and this woman got pulled out. And it turns out that she was teaching us that the doctrine of once saved, always saved. Doesn't matter what you do. Once you were saved, you were always saved. This wasn't a teaching of the church that I was at. So this is something that's extremely important. This isn't how you do the Eucharist or how you do baptism. This is talking about soteriology. And there are all these differences. And I think to minimize that across all denominations is to be not completely honest with that. Now, he mentioned some Bible verses, and the one that really has struck me is 1 Corinthians 14:33, which says that God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. If this was the case, shouldn't we see a consistent message, a congruency across Christianities? To me, it would seem that that would be the case. The biggest claim that Josh makes is, without God, we can't know anything. And I don't understand why that would be the case. I think that's a claim. I don't think there's a warrant for it. And he also said at one point that, we can't, how did you say this? You were talking about the material. Yeah, if we're just material. Well, first of all, I'm not saying that we're just material. I don't have any reason to believe that we're anything else. But I also don't have a reason to believe that material can't function and have self-reflective thought like we do. That would need to be demonstrated to me, because it's obvious that we can talk about things. Now, you could talk a little bit about whether it's completely deterministic, and I would be very happy to have that conversation. But what we're not talking about, I don't understand why there needs to be something more. Unless you're already smuggling in a belief that there has to be something more. Josh seems to want to say, you can't know anything, you can't find the truth, you can't do that without my belief system. Now, how is that any different than a Muslim, or a Hindu, or anybody else of any other religion? Now, if a Mormon stands up here and says that, do you think Josh would agree with him? Do they even worship the same God? Does that make sense under that? I think that's very unwarranted. I think it's a claim that needs demonstration. Oh, what else? I think your epistemic warrant argument, I pretty well agree with. You have to have an environment that all those factors have to be there. I don't see why that requires a deity or a belief in a God at all. I think that's pretty well it.
All right. Thank you all for being so respectful of these men. I'm now going to give you a 5-minute stretch break, not 5.5 minutes. I'm not as lenient on you guys as I am these guys. So get up, walk around a little bit, get a drink, some snacks over there, use the restroom if you'd like.
So Ty, one of the things that I kind of wanted to discuss more this evening is how you seem to think atheism doesn't entail a worldview in and of itself, but it says something negative, correct?
No.
You don't lack belief in a God?
That's not something negative.
What is it?
It's just a lack of belief.
Okay, so when you say you lack a belief in a God, does anything positive necessarily entail after that?
Nope.
Say if I said I lack belief in a tree in my backyard.
Is there a tree in your backyard?
Well, if I lack belief of a tree in my backyard, doesn't that mutually entail something like my backyard is only grass? Or I believe that my backyard is only grass?
Do you believe there's no tree in your backyard?
I lack belief in a tree in my backyard.
Do you believe there's no tree, though?
Do I believe there's no tree
Right.
in my backyard?
Right.
No, I lack belief in it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you don't have
But
a
if you lack-
negative belief about the tree. So you believe that your backyard could contain a tree
Yeah.
or could not?
Well, I lack, here's the thing, is I lack belief. With beliefs, beliefs are either warranted or they're not warranted. Do you believe, for instance, that you lack a belief?
Are you asking about meta beliefs? Like, do I believe if I lack a belief?
Sure, yeah, you can call them that.
No. What?
You don't. You don't believe that you lack belief?
Do I believe that I lack belief?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that that's a belief, right? The belief portion of it stops at I don't have that belief.
So there's no content.
Content to my lack of
Right.
belief?
Yeah.
No.
How's
No.
that?
I'm not quite sure what you're getting at.
Well, is there,
Give me an example.
when you say you lack belief in something, like I lack belief in a God,
Yeah.
why?
Because I feel there's a burden of proof that has not been met.
Okay, so you have reasons why you lack belief in a God.
Do I have reasons why I like? Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I used to believe in a God. Now, this is kind of where it gets murky, right? I used to believe in a God. And so I went from a state of belief into a state of non-belief.
So
right?
is your lack of belief supported by reasons?
Not real, not in the way that I think you're asking me.
Well, I'm just asking if you have general reasons or just various reasons of why you lack belief in a God. And I think that's where you get your worldview.
Oh, you okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
you have reasons for why you lack belief in a God. What are your reasons for that?
Because the God claim has not met its burden of proof.
According to what standard?
According to any reasonable standard of something existing.
Well, but what's your standard for reason?
What's my standard for reason? I mean, that's a very broad question. We can talk a little bit about the door example, right? The method of reasoning was the one that got me to the goal of truth. So the truth was the dimensions of the door. The method of reasoning is how I got there, right?
Right.
Right? So the dimensions of the door is my goal. Getting there reliably was the method of reasoning that I wanted to use. That's my standard. That's it.
So you would say that your standard entails only propositional evidence.
No.
What does it entail? Because the door example, I mean, is
Anything that
it's
gets me to
sensory,
the truth.
It's sensory experience.
Anything that gets me to the truth. So how can we verify the truth once you get there? I understand that's probably
Right.
your next question, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Okay.
I'm okay with saying I don't know. in a lot
Okay.
of
Then how do you?
answers.
Well, then how do you know it's truth in the first place?
If it's effective. If my door fits in that frame, I know that that's.
Well, but
Got the right dimensions.
you're relegating every type of
Are you saying there's
truth
difference?
searching. There's different ways of coming to the truth, right? I mean, you could even come to the truth through aesthetics, axiology, for instance.
Well, no. Hold on though. I want to get to the truth of the dimensions of the door.
Well, I know, but I'm saying in general.
In general,
What's your
is
standard?
aesthetic
for
true? Would you say that is true?
Well, it's a school of thought. I mean, it's a way to it's a philosophy.
Okay,
It's
I
a
got you.
branch of philosophy.
You're not advocating for that.
No.
Okay, okay.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying that's one branch of philosophy which we could go down to.
But that's
explore
not a
further.
method of truth.
I'm not talking about a method of truth. I'm saying there's different ways of coming to truth. Epistemologically, so, for instance, I mean, reason, rationality, or empiricism, there's different ways of coming to the truth.
So
So,
my definition of truth, and this
Mhm.
might help. So we have a territory and we have a map. So your map matching your territory as close as possible,
Yeah.
knowing that it's not going to be 100% accurate, otherwise your map would be the territory, right?
Right.
That's kind of my definition of truth. Would you agree with that, or is that, would you have a different definition? I want to make
well,
sure.
that's an example. I don't think that's really a definition.
Just comporting with reality, I guess. in
Just
that
truth is
instance.
that which comports with reality, right?
Sure.
But then the necessary question that follows is, what's your standard for reality, and how do you even know what reality is in the first place?
That's a
According
very
to your
good question.
standard of reason.
That's a very good question.
Because-
But I don't need absolute certainty or closure on
That's
some
not
of
what
these
I'm saying.
questions. But I think
I
it
don't
is. I
think
think that's one of those things that.
No, I think that certainty is on a spectrum. You can definitely have different levels of certainty according to epistemic warrant. You can have different levels of warrant via the 4 different criteria I gave you, or 3 different criteria I gave you earlier.
Gotcha.
So,
So on as far as certainty goes, on the question of God, how certain are you on that?
so certainty beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt.
So is
Beyond a
that
shadow of a doubt.
is it? It's not absolute.
As far as just doxastically forming an arbitrary belief and saying this is true and I don't care about what anything happens.
No.
Well, Paul makes a rational argument in Scripture. He says that if Christ has not been raised, then we're still in our sins and our faith is futile. So I think that if there's a sense in which there's a possible world in which God chose not to reveal himself, it's definitely possible that I would have never known him. I mean, there's different ways of looking at it like that.
But I'm asking about your level of certainty. I'm not asking about other possible worlds. I'm asking about here and now. So how, I talked a little bit about how I could be wrong. You didn't really jive with my example there.
Mhm.
But how would you be wrong? How could you know you were wrong?
Jesus never rose from the dead. That's the standard.
How would you know that?
If somebody had produced a body in the first century.
If somebody had produced, no, I'm talking about now.
No,
Anything
that's
now.
arbitrary. See, that's arbitrary. You're constraining my inquiry to right now. So you preclude historical study.
No.
altogether.
I'm asking right now, if everything were else were the same,
Mhm.
from this moment on, what would change your mind? You're talking about the past. I'm talking about from everything else you know to be the same.
Well,
What
yeah,
would
but I'm
change
saying
your
that's arbitrary. You're limiting my options arbitrarily.
Well,
and I'm
we're-
saying
we're
that
here-
I'm giving you a falsifiable,
But it's-
a way to falsify my religion. And that is if a body of Christ would have been produced. Or if there's some way you could produce a body now, I guess. I don't know.
So bones of Christ.
Yeah, sure.
Bones of Christ would convince you. If an archaeologist came up and said we had the bones
Well,
of
then the
Christ,
question would come about how would they even know that that's the correct ossuary or whatever. So, I would say that the real rub is historical in nature, and I think that's the area of study you have to go falsify.
but you understand we're here right now, so it's not arbitrary that I'm not trying to,
Yeah, I know, but you're precluding a whole area of scholarship, and you're limiting my options. You're precluding history, which is unscientific. You can't do that.
I'm not precluding history. I'm saying
Well, when you
here
say
we
that,
are right now.
basically, I can't use it in order to.
Oh no, you
tell
can
you why.
use that to say, hey, this is evidence that I
Right.
feel. But to say that would change my mind, obviously that wasn't produced. So is there anything now?
Why
that
wasn't
would
it
change your
produced,
mind?
though?
I don't know. Maybe Jesus never existed.
Where would you get that?
Uh,
Does that jive with the majority of
No,
scholarship?
absolutely not. But
Yeah.
do you always jive with the majority of scholarship?
Well, of course not.
Of course
But
not.
but I'm not.
Only when
I'm
it
not,
suits. Only
but-
when it suits you.
Well, but I'm not. Well, I'm not standing here saying that my entire position is an empirical position by which
Sure.
I can come to knowledge of the truth.
I
That's
abs-
your claim.
No,
not
no,
mine.
it's not. It's not. You're.
It seems to be.
I understand.
I'm trying to figure out what evidence other than propositional evidence would you see.
So from now on, though, so you want to go back to the first century. Is there nothing then from now on that would change your mind? Other than bones of Christ, which,
No, because the thing is that God has spoken through His Word, and He's told us that that's exactly how the world works from Genesis on. He's given us His revelation, His general revelation. Now, when you come back at me and you say,
Yeah.
"Well, there's no reason to believe that,"
I did say
is
that.
there? Is there? I mean, why don't you believe that?
Why don't I believe
Right.
what? Exactly. Give me,
That God's given us revelation. Why is that not good enough?
why don't I believe that God has given us revelation? I'll give you a few examples. If Jesus had taught in the first century, hey, you should heat up your milk a little bit before you feed it to your kids.
Mhm.
And this will get rid of some bad stuff in the milk. And it'll decrease infant mortality by just buttloads. Then that, to me, that would be a really good example of revelation, of a communication of information through that revelation.
Okay.
Now, I don't see any examples like that in the Bible.
Why-
What I
why-
do see, hold on one second. What I do see is everything that is communicated at the time that it was communicated is exactly what you would expect. The world is flat, bats are birds, that sort of thing.
Where's that?
Four corners of the earth sits on pillars,
yeah,
there's a
but
dome.
that, you have to understand ancient Near Eastern literature to understand that. They're not making a claim that the earth is flat. For instance, in Ecclesiastes, it's demonstrably true that the author thought that the earth was round.
Earth was a circle.
No, the earth was round.
Earth was a circle.
No.
Okay.
False. So there's
So,
I mean,
so
there's all
why
these-
isn't
yeah.
there information like that? Why isn't there information where Jesus says, "Hey, heat up your milk before you feed it to
Well,
your
why does there
kids?"
have to be?
There doesn't. I'm just saying that would be examples of information unavailable at the time that would show, hey, man, these people found out something from this source, right?
Mhm.
Instead of having to wait years and years until Louis Pasteur came along, until a human did it through methodological naturalism, right?
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying, if there was examples similar to that, instead of everything that I see in Scripture is stuff that could have been known at the time,
But nobody ever claimed to be writing a science book.
Well, that's convenience.
I mean, they're trying to drive home a point. What's important to them is a continuity from the Old Testament to the advent of Christ. That's important to the authors of the New Testament.
I tell you what's important to me.
Oh, yeah, okay, but stop. But stop right
Okay,
there.
all right, all right.
Because now you're
Joe, you're not moderating. Come on.
you're playing.
You say that I'm playing God at that point.
Right, you're arbitrarily saying that this is what must happen in order for it to be true, but you're commandeering the standard of evidence.
No.
Give a justification for doing that.
You got to tell me though. Wouldn't it be much more convincing if there was information presented in the Bible that would not have been widely available at the time?
Convincing to what end? I mean, I'm not sure what you're trying to look for.
What do you mean to what end?
Convincing to what end? I mean, the
To
Bible
believe that it's actual revelation from a divine
But
being.
that's not the purpose of the literature. You're putting an artificial grid over the Bible, and you're saying, this is what the Bible must tell me in order for me to think that it's acceptable.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
What are you saying?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it would be much more, in my opinion, much more likely to be divine revelation. You asked me why I don't believe it. That's because those pieces of information aren't in there at all. Everything that is in the Bible is according to what would have been known, according to standards that would have been known at the time. Just like everything in the Quran.
Everything that's in the Bible is according to everything that would have been known at the time. But it's not claiming to do anything that you're trying to impose upon it.
I'm not saying it is. You asked me why I don't believe. That's
right.
That's
this
a
is a
why.
great example of you artificially or arbitrarily defining what evidence is and the standard of evidence. Why do you do that? That's what I'm trying to get to. Why does it have to be that way in order for it to be true? You're saying that this has to be a certain way in order for me to believe it.
No, not exactly. I gave you one example.
Okay,
I gave
what's
you one
another
example. Sure. So if, for example, let's say that you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Every Christian had a secret language they could talk to each other in, and their holy book was written in that language, and there was no disagreement about what that holy book said in that secret language. Okay. That would be a wonderful example of, boy, I feel like there's actually something to this. There's some continuity, there's some congruency. There is, a secret language that these people can only know once they believe in Jesus.
So to the exclusion of the continuity that does exist.
No, not to that exclusion.
Why? Okay, but what I'm saying is you throw out all of these crazy conditions that need to be met in order for you to believe something.
How is that crazy if you believe in a God that's all powerful? You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is, these are too crazy, my God doesn't work that way.
Right, exactly.
How is that not special pleading?
My God's purpose in writing or inspiring Scripture wasn't to do what you're imposing upon it. So what you're doing is you're imposing something upon the text in order to say, if it said this, I would believe it. Or if it did this, for example, I would believe it. But you can define evidence any way you want to at that point. It's just like the atheist in Balboa Park. When I asked him if Jesus came and stood in front of him, if he would believe then. He said, no, I wouldn't, because that wouldn't meet my standard.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that back up, because I wanted to address that in my rebuttal. I think he is, in some ways, that's why I didn't go that direction when I was talking about falsification. Sensory evidence is troublesome, You need independent verification. That's why communication of information, right? That can be tested. That can be, I can go and talk to somebody else and say, hey, do you see this? This information matches with this.
Is that propositional evidence?
I don't know.
That's propositional evidence. Why ought it be propositional evidence only in order for something to be true?
What else do you recommend? Let me ask you that.
Well, Plantinga, for instance, would relegate belief in God to belief in other minds. Do you believe other minds exist?
I deal with other minds on a regular basis. I don't know that other minds exist.
No. It could be a Gettier problem. Classical Gettier
absolutely
problem.
It could be.
I mean, so you can't justify your belief in other minds. You assume it to be true. And that's
No.
I
have to deal with other minds every minute of every day.
You don't know they're other minds. That's what I'm saying.
They do stuff that I don't know. So if they are other minds, I've cordoned them off from my mind.
No. It could be solipsism, for instance.
Sure, absolutely.
So it could be a big illusion or Descartes' demon.
They could all be non-player characters.
Right. So you're not trying to go up to Joe and explore whether or not he's an actual other mind.
Well, I
You're not-
have had
you
that
don't-
thought.
Well, you might need to do it to me.
No, I mean, here's one of those things that I talk about in worse methods of reasoning. Appealing to certainty. I don't know that these other people aren't just non-player characters, but it seems like they are. And I have to regularly deal with them, I mean that in the nicest of ways, on a daily basis.
But that's begging the question.
It's not begging the question at all.
Because you're saying it seems like they are, therefore they are. It seems
No,
like
no,
they
no.
are.
I'm not saying they are. I'm saying
It seems like they are, therefore it seems like they are. You're reasoning circularly, viciously upon your experience.
No, no, no. It seems like they are, therefore I have to act as if they are. Because otherwise there are consequences if I do not act as if they are.
Right. So you're assuming basically circularity.
No. No, no. See,
Demonstrate how you're not demonstrating circularity. Bertrand Russell talks about this in Problems of Philosophy. Bertrand Russell admits that it's circularity, but all of a sudden Guy is saying it's not circularity.
Sure. What you're trying to do is talk about meta reasoning and intertwine it with our daily experience, and it's wordplay.
No.
Yeah. Because look, are you going to treat other people as if they're not people?
Of course not. But I'm saying that I have a standard for not doing it.
What's your standard?
The scriptures, the revelation of God. That's my standard. But when you come at me and you say that you have to do this and you constrain my evidence base to propositional evidence, and you say that this is what has to happen,
Is non-propositional.
you're not giving an account for it. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. No, you're not giving an account for it. And one thing.
Okay.
One other thing.
Yeah.
And you're not referring back to my original forms of different types of beliefs that you can have without propositional evidence. Incorrigible, a priori, and self-evident beliefs. These are all beliefs people hold.
What would you say is a self-evident belief?
All unmarried, all bachelors are unmarried.
That's an analytic. That's a tautology. It's based on how we define it. Now, if we want to smuggle in a belief with our definitions, we can do so. If we want to maintain a belief.
Okay.
But if we want to actually discover the truth, what we want to do is look at our definitions and see if they match reality, right? We define a bachelor as unmarried.
So there's an assumption that we both make about reality.
What?
That it's generally reliable, right?
No, I don't make that assumption.
You don't make the assumption that nature is generally reliable?
No. It just happens that way, and I experience it.
Are you assuming that?
No.
So you're assuming that your experiences are valid?
Dude, no. I'm not assuming my experiences are valid. I
So you don't
have to
assume
live in
your
this world.
experiences are valid?
Do you have to live in this world?
Yes.
So do I.
Okay.
I know the rules by which I play this game, just as much as you do.
You're assuming, but do you see all that you're assuming?
No.
You're assuming your experience. You're assuming knowledge is possible.
Dude, these things happen
But
to
you're
me.
not giving an account for them.
What do you mean by giving an account for it?
You're providing me with an unargued philosophical bias.
Tell me what you mean by giving an account.
Right. I'm leading up to that. You're giving me an unargued philosophical bias, which is basically the reliability of your experience, your cognitive faculties.
But I told you I'm not assuming those.
How are you not assuming those? So you don't think, or you don't assume, you don't have good reasons to think that your cognitive faculties are operating properly?
I don't have good reasons to think.
You don't have good reasons to think that your experience is generally reliable? You don't think? I mean, because your PowerPoint presentation was on reliable methods. You explicitly brought that up in your presentation.
Oh yeah.
So you're assuming reliability. Thanks, sir. You're assuming reliability. That's one assumption you're making.
No, I'm just saying it's better to have reliability. Right? So
It's better
here's
to have reliability, but you're not assuming it.
Let me stop
you.
You
don't assume your experience.
Let me stop you for a second. If I have a door and I need to measure that, right?
Right.
I need to find a good way to do that. That's all. That is it.
That's propositional evidence. We've already discussed different types of beliefs that don't require propositional evidence.
But what you want to do,
but you won't validate why you keep going. You won't justify why you keep going back to propositional evidence. You don't have an account for it.
Josh, we're going to let Ty give just an answer to that, and that's going to be the end.
So sure.
Okay. I think what we're trying to talk about is like a philosophical basis for reasoning in and of itself. And I think when you say give an account for, you're smuggling in something that's unwarranted. You're smuggling in a desire to have certainty and closure. And what I'm saying is that I don't have certainty and closure, and nobody can have that. You have to assume that you have certainty and closure with a religion.
Okay. Thank you, Ty. What's in there?
Right.
All right. Thank you, guys. And thank you all for watching that entertaining part. We are now going to have an affirming rebuttal that's specifically addressing the cross-examination questions, because remember, right after this, we're going to have the affirming and negating concluding remarks. So this is really just trying to reflect on what they just discussed. 5 minutes for Josh, 5 minutes for Ty. So Josh, if you want to come up first.
Okay, one of the things I was getting at was that according to my opponent's worldview, he's not able to account for his assumptions of the uniformity of nature, of the reliability of his experiences, which he's assuming those things to be operating properly in the very fact that he showed up to this debate tonight. If he didn't assume those things to be operating properly, why would he show up? If he didn't assume his experiences to be generally reliable and thus able to uncover some sort of truth about reality, why would he show up to this debate? I mean, how is he getting away from that? What I want to go into really quick is what I mean when I say that according to naturalism, according to materialism, or even secular humanism, whatever you want to say that you are in the vein of atheism, the probability that our cognitive faculties are generally reliable, given something like naturalistic evolution, is low, if not impossible. And this is what I mean when I say that. The probability that our cognitive faculties are generally reliable, again, given naturalistic evolution or something of that nature, is low. There are basically two different kinds of properties for belief. One is a neurophysiological property, and that's what Ty, I would think, would go for. Like the rate of fire of neurons, there's different ways your body's functioning in order to allow you to form different beliefs. And then there are property of content. That's the second one. Now, the mind, according to a naturalistic evolutionary perspective, would have to reach out and grab one particular proposition, okay, one particular truth claim, if you will, as opposed to all others. So he's making distinctions of what should be true and what's not. He thinks that truth is generally ascertainable. He thinks his experiences are sufficient enough to uncover truth within the reality in which we live. So, for instance, nature is generally uniform, is one example I was trying to bring up earlier. That's an assumption. You have to assume that in order to engage in scientific induction, for instance, rather than nature is chaotic and generally unreliable as a constant. I mean, that's his other option. But he doesn't assume that, because if he assumed that, he wouldn't have even walked out his door this morning. We must then ask, what makes a given action occur? Is it belief content, or is it just naturalistic processes? Do we have an account for content? Do we have an account for thinking that our experiences are valid, that we have warranted belief in certain things? And my contention is that atheism does not provide an account for that. In other words, why should I choose the proposition nature is generally uniform as opposed to the alternative? If the naturalist is correct, I do this because of the neurophysiological properties rather than the property of content, belief content. By virtue of these physical properties of my nervous system, belief generally causes what people do. Beliefs, however, do not cause things by virtue of their content, according to naturalism. Evolution can't really see belief, okay? It can see different physical, legal factors acting on the biological human being, which is just a machine that is working according to the laws of physics, acting upon their minds. So there's really no reason to believe that our experiences are generally valid. We do assume those things, but we're inconsistent in assuming those things if atheism is true. There's no reason to believe that our experiences are generally valid. There's no reason to believe that nature is uniform. There's no reason to believe that 5 minutes from now is going to be like 5 minutes ago. This is viciously circular. If people are simply material objects and you ask whether or not a particular belief they have has true content, the answer could be more or less 50% yes and 50% no. There's no way to break the tie. Evolution would have no way of modifying the creature's faculties in the direction of greater truth, for instance, if we were to use evolution as something part and parcel of your worldview. Human thought, then, is really no different than two salt shakers. You saw my picture of the Alka-Seltzer tablets. It's really no different than that. We're just physical, chemical combinations being acted upon by the laws of physics. And on that basis, why should we think we can know anything? Why should we think truth should be ascertainable? And why should we put any stock into our experiences? If this is true, if atheism is true, the likelihood that cognitive faculties are generally reliable is pretty low. Because there's no reason to think that it is reliable. There's no reason to think that experience is reliable. There's no reason to think that our basic faculties are reliable. So that's it.
Ty has 5 minutes for a negating rebuttal.
One of the reasons I really clicked with Josh was because our beliefs were extremely similar as far as when I was a Christian. And the other reason that I really clicked with Josh is because his use of presuppositionalism. I want you to focus on this, people. We didn't talk at all about any evidence, any reason to believe why somebody can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We didn't do that at all. All we talked about is this idea that you can't have any reasoning without a God. That's what we did. Now, if there was evidence, we would have seen it. If there was good reasons, we would have seen it. But instead, what we have to do is we have to make an exception and say, this is different. This is a different type of belief, one that cannot be subjected to examination. Presuppositionalism is really the only way that theology has survived in the 20th century. And it's interesting. It's interesting because of the boldness of its claims. It claims that you can't know anything without first assuming or having assumed upon you the nature of a God, having reality revealed to you. And what's more, it tells us that we all believe already in a God. And that people like me who don't believe are either lying about it or denying it. I know that this topic is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And I know that I've probably offended some of you and have made you cringe a little bit. But I'll tell you what, when I was 17, I saw a ghost. I was driving home from work. I saw a ghost by this old house. And I was scared and fascinated. And it felt really special. Like, boy, this something happened. And it was perfect. It was a ghostly figure. It had a face. It had a mouth. It was crazy. For about a week, I thought, wow, ghosts exist. I just saw this ghost. 2 weeks later, I drove by that same house. I saw the same ghost. It just rained out. I was driving by slowly in my Grand Prix, and I saw a ghost again. Only this time, I stopped. I turned my car around, and I drove back by again. And guess what? I saw the ghost again. And I was like, holy crap. This ghost just really likes me or something. What I did again, I got in my car, turned it back around, drove by again. This time a little bit slower. I noticed that the ghost moved a little bit slower this time too. I did this about 5 times before I figured out what the heck was going on. There was a puddle that my headlights were reflecting perfectly into the trees. And every time I would drive by, I'd see this reflection. And the branches were arranged in such a perfect way that I could see a face with eyes and a mouth. What I'm asking you to do is drive back by your belief. Don't just accept what you've been told, what you've been raised since birth to believe. Drive back by. Have the courage to think about this. That's it.
At this time, Josh will step up, give an affirming closing statement to summarize all that we've done so far tonight. Just stay there. Where's your chair? Don't start.
I get this guy's cherry.
Oh, you're good. This one's taller anyway.
That's a bar stool.
All right.
Not really.
There you go. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Really quickly, I just want to give closing remarks. Y'all, I could give evidence for the Christian position. There's no shortage of it. I could give N.T. Wright's evidence that he cites in his book, The Son of God, the resurrection of the Son of God. I could give all these evidential tenets that people have brought up throughout all 2,000 years of Christian history. I could give the ontological argument. I could give all of these different arguments, the Kalam cosmological argument. We could examine text and source criticism. We could examine the amount of manuscripts that the New Testament has to its credit. We could examine church history and the affirming nature of the resurrection. We could go through all of these different things. The problem is not the evidence. The problem is how we see our evidence according to our different worldviews, according to how we perceive the reality in which we live and the presuppositions we have about reality. Ty keeps saying that we haven't talked about evidence. We should have talked about evidence, but he still hasn't offered any answer to my initial arguments. That is, the internal critique I gave at the very beginning, the transcendental argument, and the account of warrant. He's basically just made the claim that these things don't matter. I mean, that's almost what I've heard. I haven't heard any rational reason to think that anything I gave in the opening statement is false. And I would submit to you that's because there is no justification that an unbeliever can offer. And when it comes to something like Mormonism or Islam, if we were having a debate this evening and Ty was a Mormon or a Muslim, we would talk about theism in that vein. I would discuss the philosophical problem of the one and the many and how I believe that the Trinity can account for that and how it comports with that and how that's been a philosophical issue for at least the last 2,500 years, 2,400 years, and how that's solved in the Trinity, philosophically speaking, metaphysically and epistemologically. We could talk about all these things. If we were to go down that road and talk about Islam, we could talk about their failed endeavors at preserving the Quran, right? Even contrary to their claims that the Quran has never been changed. I mean, we could talk about all of these things, and all of that could be piled up and stacked up against what they are going to claim, or what they would claim. But that's not what the discussion's about this evening. The discussion is whether or not a person is justified, or whether or not they are reasonable in believing they can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. My contention was that atheism has no ground to stand on when it's criticizing that notion of a reasonable relationship with Jesus Christ. And I haven't heard one answer to that claim yet. I heard that we're not assuming experiences. We're not assuming the legitimacy of our experience from Ty. He's not assuming that, apparently. Apparently, he's not assuming that nature is relatively uniform. He's not assuming the proper function of his cognitive faculties. But he showed up to this debate tonight, and he wanted to talk about evidence, and he's wanting to vie for truth, which are all honorable things. But he doesn't assume that any of these things function correctly. I mean, I don't understand that part. And then his next claim was presuppositionalism is really the only reason theism has survived in the 20th and 21st century. I mean, I have books at home that are by Christian theists that are totally evidential based. I mean, we could stack evidence all day long. The evidential apologetics is still well and alive. It's not failed. The problem, and where I disagree with evidential apologists, is the fact that we're assuming a bunch of things before we examine our presuppositions. We're assuming, first of all, that we're interpreting evidence the same way, that we have the same definition of evidence, which I've exposed earlier, that we don't. He wants to delimit my inquiry to propositional evidence alone, when I've demonstrated for us this evening that there are indeed different types of beliefs that we can hold that don't require or can't even require propositional evidence, like incorrigible beliefs, a priori beliefs, self-evident beliefs, so on and so forth. All of these things can be justified or warranted without propositional evidence. But for some reason, Ty wants to constrict my intellectual endeavor in knowing my faith, in knowing Jesus Christ, in trying to find out if it's true or not, say before I was a Christian, especially when I first got into apologetics. He wants to constrict all that to propositional evidence. But why? He still hasn't answered that. Why is that the case? Well, he says because it's reasonable. That's the reasonable way to come to conclusions. But that's a circular reasoning. That's the begging the question that I'm talking about. And that's what he has a burden of answering this evening. Thank you.
Now Ty will give his 5 minutes of closing remarks.
Forgot about that. I thought we were going to questions. I think it's important to understand kind of what's going on here. Earlier when I talked about different better and worse methods of reasoning, one of the things that I pointed out was making exceptions doesn't really help anybody. When we say that this is different, on this one belief that we want to maintain, it doesn't help us get to the truth. How can we discover the truth if we don't test it? And why would you be afraid to discover the truth at all? Why would you want to maintain a belief that you were afraid to find out the truth of? That doesn't make sense to me. Now, Josh said a lot about assuming. And I think there's a little bit of smuggling in some definitions there in the word assume. He asked if I assume, and by the way, I don't speak for all atheists or non-believers at all. We is not a good description. I'm just speaking here for myself. When he says assume, I think he's smuggling in give absolute accounts for. Have some certainty. Have some closure. I don't pretend that I can have closure. I don't pretend that I know all the answers. And I don't think that anybody really does. That's kind of the difference. I'm okay here with saying I don't know on these questions. But as a person out here that says, hey, I don't know, I don't understand, can you show me? Is there any demonstration that you can give to me of communication of information? That would show me. That would be a good examination of the truth. Now, it may be that Josh is right, and I'm absolutely fine to find out that I'm wrong. But I don't know that this is the way to do that. I don't know that it's very convincing to say, well, you just can't know anything at all if you don't already adopt these beliefs that I want to maintain. To me, that's just not very convincing. I think that a claim like that has to be demonstrated. You have to show me that what you want to believe about it's only reasonable with a belief in God. I think that's just a wild claim that you need to show me. We are in Missouri. Yeah, I hadn't really planned a closing statement. I really appreciate all you guys coming out tonight. Hopefully we'll answer a lot of questions. I'm going to see the rest of my time and go.
Okay, can we have some applause for these guys working tonight? Okay, so just a quick reiteration on the questions. If you guys will take those note cards and write down any questions you have, just there are pens on the back desk back there, right up here as well. Like I said, I'm going to privilege the ones that are respectful and the ones that align most with tonight's topics. But if we don't have enough questions, don't be afraid to ask questions that are a little bit outside of what we've talked about tonight, just in case we don't have enough, because we're gonna spend the last 20 minutes of tonight just going through that Q&A session. But you have 10 minutes now, so get up, stretch your legs, take a deep breath, shake it off, get some snacks, and we'll be back. We'll start up again in 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Here we are. All right, this is the conclusion. Thank you guys for being patient. We've got 20 more minutes of debate, and that'll be the official conclusion of the debate, so you'll feel free to leave at that point. But then you can also come up afterward and talk to either of the gentlemen. They'd love to answer any of your questions. I'm going to try to get to as many of the questions as I can tonight, but I also don't know how long these guys can both be long-winded, and we don't want that to that could keep our limit on our questions. But what I'm going to do is have each guy start with an answer to the question, and you won't get a chance for a rebuttal. Okay, so try to be as thorough in your initial answer. Then I'm going to give the second guy an opportunity to talk as well. And if they bring up points you didn't, that's just going to be unfortunate. So try to be thorough, but also concise with your answers to the questions, because if we let the mic go back and forth, we could have a long time on each question. So this will just we're now trying to honor the audience.
So he'll give the person who the question was addressed to will give the answer.
They will give the first answer.
And then the second person will be allowed an opportunity.
That's correct. So both men will get a chance to respond to both questions, but the person to whom it was addressed will get the first opportunity to address the question. So this first one actually works very well for both of them, and it's very consistent with tonight's theme. And I think it's a fair question that everybody needs to know tonight. So just because Josh has got to open every time, we're going to let Ty start with this first question. If it seems like most of our discussion tonight hinged on God, Ty even brought that up in one of his statements. Why did you guys even choose a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as the topic of the debate?
So there is, how long do I have?
Try to keep it under 30 seconds.
Okay.
A minute.
30
No,
seconds?
No, sorry. We've got about 2 minutes.
Okay,
2
okay.
minutes.
So when talking to people about religious beliefs, you can draw parallels across religions. You can say, hey, this is what a Muslim would say. Hey, this is what somebody who is a Hindu would say. They use the same method of reasoning. They use the same arguments to come to this conclusion that is their belief is true. And one of the common rebuttals that you get to this, and this is called the outsider test of faith. How would somebody outside of your faith take a look at this? The most common rebuttal you get is, yeah, but see, this is different. This is not a religion. This is a relationship. And so what I want people to think about is this claim of a relationship, does that make sense? Is this a reasonable claim to believe is even possible?
That's excellent. Thank you.
So I disagree. I disagree with the way that that's framed. Oftentimes, when evangelicals give that kind of one-liner, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. I think what they actually mean to say is that this isn't legalism. This is actually something that's real, and we've been justified by Christ through His work. And this is an intimate sort of a thing, rather than just a list of check boxes, which helps us to earn or ascend to our right standing with God. So Christianity doesn't work like that. It doesn't work in the sense that you can do certain things. You just have a checklist that you have to fill out and do, and then you'll be good with God. Rather, it's that Jesus has paid the ultimate price and has done that which you could not. And because what Jesus has done, you can be right with God, not because of what you've done. And so when people say it's not a religion, it's a relationship, I think they're kind of using religion as a misnomer. I think they're kind of just saying that this isn't legalism. Christianity is a religion. I totally, fully endorse that kind of language with qualifiers. When you think of most religions, you think of a way to earn the right standing with God. And so what evangelicals are doing is that they're rejecting that understanding of religion, and they're saying that this is totally contrary to anything you'll find in something like Islam or something like Hinduism or something of that sort, or even in kind of Reformed Judaism, so to speak. So, in short, all that means is that this isn't a works-based religion. This is a religion that is by grace through faith.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, this next question is going to be addressed directly to Ty. He'll get a chance to answer, and then Josh will get a chance to share any thoughts he has on it. Okay, so you said that if the Bible contained instructions to pasteurize milk, you might be more inclined to believe it was supernatural. One example of a supernatural mark of Scripture that is fair to its genre is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. How do you explain the purported fulfillments of hosts of Old Testament passages in the New Testament?
So to be absolutely fair to you in this question, we'd have to go kind of one by one, because there may be some that I'm completely unaware of. It's a very good question, but here's kind of the problem with prophecy. How'd you know it was fulfilled? It's really easy to claim that a prophecy has been fulfilled. It's really easy to look at something and claim that it's been fulfilled, but it's harder to show that that's actually the case. So I just read an article, actually, not that long ago. My wife knows that phrase. I say that all the time. I just read an article. I just read an article the other day where people have read Nostradamus, and they think that Nostradamus perfectly predicted the Star Wars trilogy. And it's really convincing. You read it, and it's line by line. It lines up with the trilogy. The problem with prophecy is if it's not very specific, if it's not dated, and if it could possibly be self-fulfilling, that data is just not that great.
I think that's a valid line of reasoning to kind of argue from from the prophetic text in the Old Testament. The problem is, as you've seen, the problem is not whether or not those are there. The problem is a worldview issue fundamentally, because Ty doesn't see that as evidence. And so what we have to get down to is what is evidence, what is our presuppositions behind evidence, what constitutes evidence, those things. But, I mean, as far as prophecy is concerned, you look at something like Isaiah 53, and it describes Jesus' death to a T, his humiliation and his death to a T, and it says what the purpose of that death is for. And then you have New Testament authors that are attesting to this very thing happening in the first century. And you even have authors like Tacitus, which most scholars would agree is a valid source in the first century, saying that Christus was crucified on a Roman cross. And so you have external authors bearing attestation to this event, who are not Christians, who are Roman pagans, bearing attestation to something like the crucifixion. You have all the New Testament authors, which there's no reason to exclude them from the load of evidence that we have. So you do see a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, whether or not my opponent here, whether or not Ty accepts that, is another matter. And that's why I submit that these types of debates really need to be over philosophical presuppositions, or presuppositions like the fact that we assume that our experience is generally reliable, the uniformity of nature, so on and so forth. What constitutes evidence to those things?
Can I piggyback on that for a second?
You have 30 seconds to piggyback on that.
So I would accept it if it was stated, very specific, and impossible to be self-fulfilled. Okay. Also, Jews disagree with you on the Isaiah text, so it's kind of interpretation at that point too.
Great. Give that back to Josh for me,
Fine.
Josh.
Yeah.
Josh, this question is for you. Here's what it says. If I understand correctly, you believe that God is foundational and universal, such that all rational people must assent. If this is the case, one assumes that this being, called God, is the foundation of the axioms and rules of logic, which are part of the universal method. My question is then, why is it necessary that God must be this foundation versus the axioms and laws being the foundation themselves?
So when you look at something, what it sounds a lot like Wrightian foundationalism. Basically what somebody like Plantinga, which is one of the points I would disagree with him on, is that he does kind of propose this system of axioms, and basically it goes along with also like self-evident beliefs and properly basic belief. And my only response to that is that the axioms themselves have to have a foundation. And otherwise they're just kind of floating. I mean, there's no reason we should even be able to know that the axioms are reliable or true, or something that ought to be given any sort of intellectual assent in the first place. If you argue that they're properly basic or that they're self-evident, that's fine, but what accounts for your assumption that they're basically reliable, what accounts for your assumption that those are even axiomatic in the first place? And so that's where I'd go initially with that.
So we're using a lot of big words, right? We're talking about a lot of different things. It could be that the world just bottoms out. It could be that just that's the way it is. It could be, and this is kind of what this question is addressing, it could be that the laws of logic are just a description of how the world actually works. And to kind of add to that, add on top of that, and say, no, this flows from the nature of God. That is a claim that needs demonstration. Otherwise, you're just trying to maintain a belief that you already believe.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that.
So, two gentlemen wrote a paper named Greg Welty and James N. Anderson, and what they did was they presented a very cogent, I think, convincing argument that the laws of logic are propositions, first of all, primarily, and propositions are primarily mental. And if they're primarily mental, that means they're primarily thoughts, okay? And since the laws of logic are propositions which are mental, which must be necessarily thoughts, so their argument goes, there must be a mind thinking those laws of logic immutably, in a sense where they're always regulative for us in this world. And so, I mean, that's just one thing I could stack against that. Of course, he's not going to accept it, because then again, we go back to the problem of how we perceive evidence.
Okay, next.
So yeah, actually, this next question is going to be for Josh, right? Because I just asked that one to
Yeah,
Ty.
that's right.
Is that how? Yeah, because you piggybacked. I think that's how that worked. Right. So this next one is for Josh. Is that what I just said?
Yeah. Joe, the first two questions were for Ty, I believe.
Okay,
I think
thank
the
you.
first question that Josh answered.
That was
last
the-
one. The last one is the first.
It's a good thing we're not paying you.
I know. I'm not keeping track.
Poor Joe.
Well, they both answered the first one, and then we had a Ty question and a Josh question, so it's a Ty question.
Yay.
Okay, so this question, we're going to grab a couple we got a couple people texting in questions that we're watching. And I think that you mentioned a second ago, we're using big words. And some of us just want to have some simpler things. There's some more personal things going on in this debate as well. And so this one is a little bit off topic as far as what we've talked about. But I do think, especially for the Christians in the group, and this is something that they're wondering. So I just want to give you a chance to answer to this. You say that you were a Christian for 17 years.
Yeah.
So how old are you now, if you're comfortable with that? And could you defend your initial conversion to Christ as a legitimate conversion?
Well, I can't do that, right? Because I don't believe that if you describe a true Christian, right, as somebody that actually has a relationship with Jesus Christ, I don't believe I was that. I don't believe anybody else is either. I can definitely tell you that I believed it. My age right now, 29. I'm 29. 1992, on a Friday night at Assembly of God in Jefferson City, Missouri, is when I walked down the aisle for the first time. What was it? Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames is when this happened. I didn't feel like it took that night. I kind of understood it intellectually, but I didn't really feel like, boy, I'm now a Christian. I felt weird. I didn't really feel like it had taken. So I didn't really consider that moment to be my conversion. The next Sunday, I talked to my child pastor, Darla, and she explained everything to me in very clear, very personal terms. And that is the moment that I felt like I was a Christian. Quick story, when I was 8 years old, I loved Legos. Oh my gosh. I had built this huge tower using every single Lego that I had in my Lego box. And my cousin Jason was coming over, and I was super excited for him to see this. But I got this strong feeling, this conviction that I was putting this Lego creation above God. Like this, I was putting off some of my junior Bible quiz, which I loved at the time, to do this. So I remember I went to the top of the stairs and I pushed this down and I destroyed it because in my mind this was a false idol. So I definitely believed it at the time. But this isn't a question that I'm unused to. Everybody asks me, were you really a Christian? It's fine to be skeptical of that. I thought I was. I don't have much more than that to say. Thank you.
Josh, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No.
Okay, yep, I knew that would be a more personal question, so I'm going to go ahead and direct this question to Josh. Josh, how do you find strong evidence for reality, your experiences, what we know and believe as a society? That is, scientific laws, civil rights, as Southern Christians used to believe black people did not have souls and did not go to heaven, and then relationships, senses, etc. When you base your knowledge and reality on a faith-based belief system, and then there's a postscript. The reason the civil rights example is relevant is because it was, at one time, a belief based in faith that was changed by society over time.
So this is kind of really why. First of all, what we need to do is we need to acknowledge if that question assumes that I'm accounting for these things on a Christian foundation. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to acknowledge that sin exists. Okay, sin is something that is pervasive, and people do evil things, and they use methods in an unwarranted type of way to justify their evil actions. This is actually something that happens in Scripture, and we're told to watch out for this sort of thing in Scripture. People preaching false gospels, people trying to enslave Christians back into a kind of a system of bondage, of legalism, and kind of imagining that the Levitical system remained, even though with the advent of Christ it had faded. So these examples of people using the words of God in order to distort things is an example given in Scripture itself. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, people sinfully use the faith in order to justify what they've done. Hitler's one that kind of took the side of the Catholics in order to have a more politically attractive edge. So he kind of tried to side and become friendly with the Roman Catholics. Does that mean that Hitler was actually a Roman Catholic, or that Hitler was actually a Christian, or that Christianity itself is to be accountable for what Hitler did? Of course not. It's somebody using something in a false manner in order for them to gain personally from it or politically. And so people use stuff all the time for their own selfish gain. The Southern Christians that, I don't know exactly where, I've never heard an answer to this. I don't know exactly where they found warrant for Southern slavery, antebellum slavery, in Scripture. There's a difference that Scripture does talk about slavery. It's a descriptive and prescriptive distinction that we make exegetically. And so I don't understand where the Southern Christians would have gotten a prescriptive text for slavery for our time post-Christ. But, people use things in an evil way for selfish or political agendas.
I'm going to be really mean. That sounds super post-hoc to me. That sounds very, these people, they did it, it's their fault. It's not the fault of the religion at all, right? And I completely agree with his example on Hitler. It doesn't mean Hitler was a Christian, doesn't mean Christianity was bad. But what I would suggest to you is if there was a personal relationship that people have with Jesus Christ, if there was communication of information, if there was divine revelation, people would know that slavery was wrong. People would know. This wouldn't have to be something that we'd have to figure out for ourselves. That's just not how that would have to happen. Every time, I think we behoove ourselves to not forget how Christianity behaves when it is strong, or how religion in and of itself behaves when it is strong. This type of conversation, this would not have happened 200 years ago. Heck, it wouldn't have probably happened 20 years ago. When it is strong, religion tries to suppress conversation like this. This has happened over and over again, and we know this. That's it.
Can we just draw a distinction between religion and a relationship with Jesus Christ? Because they're not the same thing. To say that religion is a relationship with Jesus Christ, it's not. Religion is man-made.
Okay, so hold on. Let me answer. Can I piggyback on what Ty said?
Sorry, I had to say that.
Maybe we might have to stick with the questions that he's actually written in. So Ty's obviously precluding the possibility of sin. I understand that. And he's also assuming an ethical standard, which, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I suppose, or I contend that atheism doesn't have a way to account for an ethical standard. Nietzsche was also an influence on Hitler, which is especially interesting because Nietzsche was not especially religious. He hated religion. He had a very dismal worldview. And it was because of his worldview, because of his ideology, that really dwindled down the value of a human life, because there's really no way to objectively give value to a human life on naturalism alone. It's all a matter of opinion, like I've said. Really, consistently, we are totally consistent in eliminating human life, according to unbelief, according to naturalism, because there's nothing but human opinion governing the value of human life. Hitler's opinion of human life, especially Jewish human life, was very, very, very low. Okay, now who's to say that Hitler was wrong? If you just appeal to emotion, that's not good enough. We can't just appeal to emotion because our emotions are wrong. Our emotions can be wrong. And so I think that it's impossible to get an ethical standard out of naturalism alone, apart from just arbitrary human opinion, whether that be a result of groupthink or individualism.
Great, appreciate that, Josh. Keep the mic. This one's, I'm sorry, it's now Ty's turn. I've got a question for Ty. We're going to try to squeeze two more in here.
Keep it straight.
We are really trying to honor the question askers in this one. I appreciate your question, and there's, as I mentioned, there will be a time afterward to come up and interact with these guys, so if you do have more questions after this, please come up and talk. But I'm going to try to get through 2 more questions, and that will have answered all the questions that we received tonight. So just to honor the people who did that work to come up with those. So this next one is from someone who texted in a question. Here's what it says. This is to Ty. You stated at the beginning that you have a desire for truth and for others to know truth. It seems to me from your prepared remarks that truth and preference are one and the same for you. Can you try again to distinguish otherwise?
Truth and preference are one and the same.
One and the same.
Not at all. As I mentioned, we need to be very clear in our goals. What we want to accomplish? What is our epistemic goals here? If we want to maintain a belief, that's a preference. We want to maintain a belief. I want to believe that there's a soul, right? I want to believe there's a place that I go after I'm dead. That would be my preference. I don't think that's the truth. So I think that when I'm talking about discovering truth, I'm not talking about preference at all. I'm sorry if I wasn't very clear about that. I'm sure this guy's going to have something to say.
First of all, I don't think it's warranted to draw a false dichotomy between truth and belief. I think what Ty's doing is he's kind of estranging truth from belief. One can have a belief in the truth, and so they're not mutually exclusive, and they're both important because when you get down to the very root of it, you have to form a belief about the truth. You have to form a belief about whether or not, you have to form a belief about the truth. I mean, that's it. And so beliefs are very important. You can't get to knowledge of the truth without forming beliefs first. And so that's what's important to consider. So this kind of like estranged separation that's between truth and belief, I think, is arbitrary, and it's not a dichotomy at all. They're mutually inclusive, and they complement one another, and it's necessary for that to be the case.
Okay.
So I wasn't drawing a dichotomy between truth and belief. I was drawing a dichotomy between epistemic goals of maintaining belief versus discovering truth. When you want to just maintain belief, I absolutely understand that you have truth over here and you have a belief about that truth.
Yeah.
And of course, knowledge is a subset of truth or belief in that way. But my distinction is, I'm over here. I just want to maintain belief, and I'm going to reason any way I can to maintain my beliefs that I hold dear, versus I'm going to do whatever I can to discover the truth.
Okay, great. We'll let Ty start with this next question because it's for both men. And this will be our last question for tonight. After this, if you all want to give them a round of applause, and that will close the official debate tonight. So for both of you gentlemen, is an assumed belief that Christ exists able to be proven before death? Ty, will you start with your answer?
Is an assumed belief. Let's read that to
Let me
you.
read it one more time. Is an assumed belief that Christ exists able to be proven before death? So if can I prove that Christ is real, that he exists before I've died?
Prior to dying.
You're right.
Should be. I don't know why anyone would accept a belief that cannot be shown to be true. I mean, even that question kind of smuggles in this thought of something happens to me after I die. I don't know. I don't know is the answer. I mean, and I'll be very straight up with you. I'm not 100% sure if that can be accomplished. I don't know why, though.
So let me, just to be fair to the question, so
Yeah.
the question is it possible?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but I don't know why you would believe it if it was impossible.
So I just wanted to say something about this, this smuggling lingo that keeps coming up, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of, I'm not entirely certain where Ty's going with that kind of language, but it assumes basically that we have other than truthful agendas, or an agenda that's aimed at something other than the truth, namely at maintaining belief. But if I want to maintain belief, what if I want to maintain belief in the truth? That's the thing, that's what I'm driving toward, and that's why belief's not necessarily separated from truth. When it goes to what the question was, more specifically, whether or not it's possible to prove Jesus or the existence of Jesus?
Yes. Is an assumed belief that Christ exists able to be proven before death?
I suppose that depends on what you mean by proven, whether or not you mean absolute certainty. Again, Paul argues kind of in a rational manner. So the language can get really philosophical and tricky there. Is it possible to give good reasons for the belief in Jesus? And yes, definitely possible to give very good reasons. As a matter of fact, I think it's possible to give good reasons to the exclusion of the contrary. And I don't think that if Jesus is the person through whom all things were made, that it's impossible to get away from the reality of Christ in one sense or another.
The person that asks that, come up to us, because there's the assumed part, the proved. We want to know what you mean.
And he means come up afterwards. So
Yeah,
don't feel like
afterwards.
we're not shaming you in front of everybody. Okay.
No, we just want to know.
Yes. So would you all please give a warm a round of applause for these men and all their work, and thank you for coming out. This concludes the debate tonight.